Nothing on the Bunnell Foundation's Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast should be considered medical advice. Medical advice can only come from your CF physician. Cystic fibrosis can be a devastating diagnosis, but living with the disease can bring positivity and a new appreciation for each day. From the Bunnell Foundation in Detroit, Michigan, it's the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast, sponsored by Vertex Pharmaceutical. Here's your host, Laura Bunnell.
I met Stephen Strickland years ago, and in my memory, I was at the Apple store in Troy, Michigan, and there was a tech who was helping me with my computer, and we got around to talking about my foundation, and he told me that there was an employee there that had CF. Stephen was open about his CF, and this tech wanted to know if I wanted to meet him, and of course I said yes. We started talking, and we have been friends ever since. Since we recorded this podcast, Stephen has announced a fundraiser that will benefit the Bunnell Foundation. His Giant Helmet company will donate proceeds to our foundation and Emily Schaller's foundation as well. Stephen Strickland is 28 years old. He has new hope for the future after getting on a CF modulator drug, and he's planning for the future with his Giant Helmet business, which we will explain in this podcast. And he shares his journey with his coworkers at Apple and with you.
So great to see you, Stephen. And it's been a while since I've actually seen you in person for sure, thanks to the pandemic. But it's also been a long time since I've even seen you on Zoom. It's nice to see you again.
Yes, you as well. I'm glad we can make this happen.
So you are not even 24 hours out of the hospital at this point. You were just in for an exacerbation at U of M. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Actually, I was at Harper Hospital. I do see U of M, and I do my exacerbation stays currently at Harper Hospital in Detroit. But I'm feeling much better. I've got some good energy back. So I wasn't really like that 10 days ago. So it's always a good feeling to have that energy back.
I'm so glad. And so tell us about your CF journey. You've always been the most upbeat, positive person since I've known you. And you've had so much health-wise that you've had to deal with mentally, physically. So tell us about your journey and where you are now.
Oh, man. It's been quite the journey. A lot of people with CF know it. A lot of times it's just one battle after the other. And for me, I battle with when I maybe caught like a certain bacteria, or you start culturing something new and you start experiencing new side effects, or you start to realize your health is degrading in a way. So my first significant, I would say, CF milestone that I can remember is in 9th or 10th grade. I had been admitted into the hospital and I had a new bacteria that I was culturing, and I had caught MRSA. I had Pseudomonas since I was 5, and that kind of seems like, everyone's got Pseudomonas, no big deal, part of the regular club there. But when I caught MRSA, that was the first time I started having mucus that I would get like this rotten smell in my nose, or the taste was kind of changing a little bit. And I noticed my mucus got a little darker, and there was a lot of noticeable concern, like from the doctors when they were discussing this new bacteria with me. And at first we thought maybe we could clear it out. I used to do my stays at Troy Beaumont, and it was just weird to notice that tone of voice change with my doctors, because I never really had much of a concern for whatever was going on. You'd get in the hospital, you get better, you get out. I was in there for about 3 weeks, and I had gotten better, but it had pretty much been relayed to me that this bacteria wasn't going to be something that they thought they could eradicate, and that it was going to be something I was going to have to deal with for the rest of my life. And when you're in like 10th grade, you're like, oh, okay, this sounds pretty serious. So at that point, I got used to, there was going to be different drugs that was going to be introduced into my body at this point, where, before it was like, okay, here's Toby, or here's Casten.
And can I ask you, in your mind, is this part of, or are you even aware of a grieving for your healthy self, or a change in the realization of the disease? Is it sinking in mentally at this time? Is all that kind of changing your path a little, like you're kind of understanding the disease better?
Yeah, there was a sobering moment, maybe just a year or two before that. It's funny because I work with computers now, but I was never a big computer guy growing up. And I remember being 12 or 13, and I had made the mistake of Googling what cystic fibrosis was. And I read what the expected life expectancy was. And I remember reading, I think at the time it was like 31, 32. And I was like, wait a minute.
I don't even think it was that old.
Like, yeah, it wasn't. And I was like, wait a minute. My mom is.
I think it was 17 when you were born.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, well, my mom is that old. All of a sudden, I was like, oh, man. That's when I realized that my life was much different than other people's. I understood, okay, I have to go in the hospital once in a while, and I cough a little bit more than others, but I never really thought too hard about my CF. I just thought it was like this extra job I had to do. To have that kind of hit me mentally, and then almost a year or two after that, then I catch this big, scary bacteria, MRSA, and it's one thing to be told you have this problem. You are able to physically feel that problem along with being told about it, and it all clicks. You're like, oh, this is going to get real serious here. And at first it was a shock to the system, kind of became part of it's like, okay, it's just a new area of responsibility for this job I didn't sign up to have that I just got to do.
And I also wanted to ask you, in talking to a lot of other moms with kids with CF, obviously, one of the things we were saying, and I wonder if you agree with this, is that our kids should learn about transplants when they're in the pediatric clinic, at least age appropriate, some kind of information so that it's not such a shock or there isn't such a huge learning curve for everyone if you should be in that situation. And I just wondered what your thoughts are. It doesn't mean you're going to have a transplant or you might have to think about it just because you're being told about it, but at least then you kind of know what to expect. What do you think about that?
There were conversations for sure. So before I went to Harper, I saw Dr. Abdul Hamid at Children's Hospital in Detroit, and the possibility of needing a lung transplant was always discussed as almost as if this is what happens. Your CF will get to a point where a transplant will be needed. And at that point, I remember I had actually run into somebody with CF. His name was Armin, and he was like one of my friend's sister's boyfriend. He was 9 years older than me, and he had a transplant. And I used to always go to they used to have these yearly CF updates in Detroit, like in November. And I would go to them, and transplant was just always discussed. So I always knew one day I'm going to need new lungs. When you're younger, you're just like, okay, all right, I guess I'll need new lungs. But when, once you realize what a transplant is and all it entails, it's a bit of a different mental understanding, and it takes a certain emotional depth to really grasp that. But, oh yeah, transplant was, yep, that's going to happen.
Okay. And not everyone does need a transplant though. But now you're in a situation where you're trying to decide if you want a transplant because you're on the CF modulator that came out in 2019 that's changing the underlying condition of cystic fibrosis for you. So tell us about, I don't even know if you can call it a dilemma. It seems like it's such a trivial thing to say when it's such a huge life-changing decision for you. But tell us about that dilemma on how you're thinking about whether or not you should have a transplant.
That is the biggest conflict that I face mentally. Originally, I was sent to U of M in May of 2019 to discuss getting transplanted. My health was deteriorating, and it was deteriorating quickly. At that point in my life, I was 25. After MRSA, I had caught Mycobacterium avium in a senior high school. A year and a half after that, I caught Mycobacterium abscessus. And I cleared abscessus not once, not twice, but 3 times in the course of 7 years. And with that just came rapid deterioration of my lungs. And in May of 2019, I was at like 26% FEV1. I was like 110 pounds. And I went to U of M, and they basically said, hey, look, even though you meet the criteria of needing a transplant, at that time I was still positively culturing Mycobacterium abscessus. Mm-hmm. and I was told I'm not eligible for transplant, that it was a contraindication. So that kind of slammed the door shut on me. And doing further research, people have, with that bacteria that had been previously transplanted, did not have good outcomes. So it was like, oh, okay, I can see why they don't do this. But it was weird. That kind of, I was in a relationship at the time that kind of cost me the relationship because there wasn't really a future to be discussed, it seemed like. And then what changed is I got access to a CF modulator in November of 2019. I was still hanging on. The end of September, I was out in Florida for my sister's wedding in 2019, 4 months after this appointment at U of M. And while I was down there, I was informed I was going to get access to this modulator that was coming out. And this was great news. This was like 2 days before the wedding. So I was all happy. The day after the wedding, I actually ended up out in the ICU in Florida. It was in Clearwater, Florida.
Your favorite place, as we know now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, the plan was I was going to stay on the beach with my aunt after the wedding for a week, just to hang out down there.
Nice.
And instead, my aunt was calling my mom and my stepdad 2 hours before their flight went off because she said, you need to come take a look at your son. He doesn't look so well. So my stepdad flew out, but my mom stayed back and came and looked at me, and I had like a 103 fever. I sat in the tub of my aunt's hotel room for 2 hours. I couldn't get out of the tub. Like a 103 fever, and my neck felt like Rice Krispies, like bubble wrap.
Wow.
And it hurt to breathe, and my chest was in a lot of pain, and I had no energy. So Dr. Kistner told us to go to the nearest hospital. I was 106 pounds. I was at 21% FEV1. They were actually preparing to airlift me home. They didn't think I was going to make it. And they had to stop the airlift before we got on there because they realized I was having something called subcutaneous emphysema, where some air sacs in my lung had burst and that air got trapped in my neck and the center of my chest. And they were worried that had caused a spill of bacteria from my lungs into my bloodstream, and it could have caused sepsis and all this other stuff. So it was a freaky incident. And I was lucky enough to survive that. My other sister came back down, and I wasn't allowed to fly for a while because of that risk. So luckily my sister came down, and my mom and my sister drove my carcass home.
Wow.
When I got home, the plan was to get a chest port put in and to get a feeding tube put in, just to try and survive at this point. And shortly after that appointment at U of M, I actually received a negative on that Mycobacterium abscessus. So in my mind, I was like, okay, I'm 6 months away from being technically, according to the U of M, restoring my eligibility to be transplanted. If I can get a year of negatives on the abscessus, I can be eligible for transplant. And now I have barely any FEV1 left. I'm 106 pounds. And then I get blessed with this new drug that comes out, this modulator that I was eligible for. Within 2 weeks, I had this insane turnaround in my health. I decided against getting a feeding tube, but I was able to put on almost 20 pounds on my own. And my FEV1 was back above 30. I think the highest I hit was 35%. And I was like 120 pounds, and I felt normal again.
Wow.
Within 3 to 4 weeks. And I was blown away, and I was back to working full time, no problem. It was insane. The amount of emotions I had when I started that drug, to go from such dire circumstances to being able to wake up with a smile and have my energy back, it was quite the blessing, I would say. I go to U of M in May of 2020 during a pandemic.
Right.
To confirm I was now eligible for transplant, and now I kind of didn't really want one. It was weird.
Because you were feeling so good, you didn't want to go through the risk of transplant.
Right.
Because if you get to the other side, and I don't know what the statistics are, and I should find out, if you get to the other side, you have a whole other set of issues, but you're living with new lungs and you can breathe, but you have rejection medicines. And of course, there's always a risk of not making it through the operation. So is that what was going through your mind?
Yeah. One way that I like that they put it is, you say you trade one disease for another. And at that point, for me, it was kind of more about the idea of what I can control. And for the most part, people seem to understand that even though you are facing certain bacteria, when there are drugs out there that work to still treat them, like you do feel like you have a semblance of control. And with transplant, you are giving up part of that control to chance, where you cannot predict rejection. You do not know if your body is going to reject the donor's lungs. The best you can do are take these immunosuppressants, which helps, prevent that. But rejection, it seems, in most cases, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And at this point, I had followed quite a few people that I'd met with CF over the years, some that had transplants, some that didn't. And it doesn't help when some of these people had great outcomes and some of them didn't make it or had poor outcomes. Or when you talk to them intimately, and some of them are going through that rejection, it gives you pretty cold feet to not wanting, if that's something you even want to experience. It's been tough. I was approved to be listed in November of 2020 after I went through the transplant process. And once they called me, it was great news I could get transplanted. And I was like, okay, that's great, but I do not want to be listed right now. And it creates unintentionally, I would say, almost like a contentious relationship with the transplant team, because for years, that's what they do with CF. You get to a certain point and your option is lung transplant or else. But now with this new modulator that's out there that is so effective, there have got to be multiple people like me that now they're stuck. The lung damage is already done. You can't reverse this lung damage. But this drug has restored your health enough to a point where you're still able to experience a quality of life that you're okay with, at least in my opinion. My FEV1 currently is 27%.
Which is unbelievable for someone who isn't aware of cystic fibrosis. I mean, and you're not on oxygen is truly amazing.
Yeah, I'm still able to hit 100% O2. If you do a 6-minute walk on me, at the end, I might get a little lower than that, but I'm able to operate. I don't have to lug an oxygen tank around. I don't find myself actively seeking a flight of stairs to climb, and I don't play sports anymore. There's certain things that I strategically avoid, but at the end of the day, when I have to sit and think about my life and the things that I enjoy to do, I'm able to experience a level of happiness at 27% FEV1. I don't see transplant changing yet. It's tough because there are things with CF that you don't know what could happen. At the end of July this year, 3 months ago, I had a massive hemoptysis where I almost needed to be embolized. Mm-hmm. And that's not going to happen with nice, fresh lungs. So I run that risk.
Right. No one can judge you. It's your decision to make. It's your body. It's your life. It's whatever is right for you. But it's such a hard decision. And I know we talked before we started doing this podcast, we talked about your mom. What does your mom think about this? It must be a very hard conversation.
It is. Like almost every time that we talk, she just has to throw in you need to get on the list, or you need to get a transplant. Or if I go over just to watch a movie and I cough 3 times, she's like, yeah, you need to get listed. She's my mom, and her whole life, she's raising a kid with CF. And just like I was told, she was told this is what needs to happen as a transplant once the lungs become so damaged. She was at my bedside when I was barely there in Florida. And she's been there when I've had massive hemoptysis. I can't imagine being someone's mom and having to watch their kid go through that. And I know that she just wants me to stay alive and be there. But it's hard, I think, to talk to anyone that doesn't physically go through it. And for me, when I was fighting those mycobacteriums, I was doing IVs every day, 3 times a day. At this point, it was 8 of the last 10 years of my life. I have been continually, either I've had a PICC line or a chest port that's just access, and I was working around it. This battle has been really like a slow burn for me. And it's really hard for me to say, yes, I want to fight even more after I fought so long. Now that I have this new drug, this is the first time I've ever felt like I have a little bit of a reprieve.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to go from like this slight, I don't want to say it's not a vacation from CF. It's just crazy to know how hard I fought.
Maybe it feels like a vacation for you from CF.
Yeah.
That's a great way to describe it. It's giving you a break. It is. It does sound like it's giving you a little bit of a vacation from CF.
I can't imagine other people out there that just, you wake up and you're so full of mucus and you have to, before you even start your day, you have to do airway clearance. You have to get this stuff out, and then you have to eat, and then you have to do all these steps to make sure that your day is going to be okay. And when I started waking up, I could just sit up and not cough and not have like pleurisy or pain. Like, it was insane. It's so hard for me to describe that mental peace it's brought me. So it's hard for me to tell someone, okay, now I want to get a transplant, because now I don't know what transplant's going to bring. And no one can guarantee it'll work. So if this is working for me right now, even though it's not perfect, it's hard for me to justify such a drastic step right now.
But you are where you are right now. And then if you need to make a different decision, I assume you will.
Yes. If I am lucky enough, I would say continue to depreciate slowly enough where I can make that agile decision to get listed, I would be open to it. And of course, I want to stay alive, but I don't want to take the last necessary step to stay alive until I absolutely have to. And that's the big risk that I'm running with transplant. They always say you have a window where you are healthy enough to survive the transplant, but sick enough to need it. And every time I meet with U of M or my regular CF doctors, they're telling me you are in that window right now, and they're scared I'm going to miss that opportunity. And I get it, but when you look at the statistics of transplant, it's like 50% of the people who get a transplant, they still are not here like within 2 years, 3 years. It's a coin flip. If I had to flip a coin right now and choose 2 years with my own lungs or 2 years with someone else's, I would choose my own. That's just the way I would choose it, because I like the semblance of control I have. And just from what I've heard how rejection feels, I don't know if I want to let myself suffer like that. And not that it's suffering, but to me, from what I've heard from the people I know, it just seems like such a tough decision. And I don't know if mentally I would be able to justify it until it's absolutely necessary.
And it's just another reminder of how complicated this disease is and how many decisions there are. I mean, you're only 28 years old.
Yeah.
It's like, this isn't for someone who has a lifetime of experience behind them, right? This is something you really started, it sounds like, to deal with mentally in high school, and now you're 28. So it is a huge problem, decisions, a lot of things to think about for a 28-year-old. And I think it's also a reminder of there are so many factors. The new CF modulators and new ones that will be coming out offer so much hope, but it's not a cure. It isn't the complete answer, right? There are so many different factors, and it depends on each person and what their health is at the time that these new modulators come out.
Yeah, it's definitely created a new dilemma for people with this in CF. It's not a cure. I like to think of it almost puts my CF on slow motion. My exacerbations are so much easier to predict. With CF, like, you get sick so fast, so drastically, so quickly. Like, you catch a cold, you're going down. But now if you catch a cold, you're going down, but you can contact your doctor without panic. And that's a beautiful thing to me. And it's great to know that people with CF who have a higher FEV1 that I do, like, they have this possibility of a life not full of so many battles, which is a beautiful thought. On the flip side, you have people like me who are still hanging on, that dealt with the brunt of CF without these modulators. And we have the know-how of how to scrap our way through this illness. And we have, I would say, a true grit to really deal with this disease. And it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out with the people that are healthy enough to stay super healthy, but sick enough that are going to drop. I'm down here, and I've met people down here that have worked their way back up here, and that inspires me. But the CF world is now going to face a new problem. People with CF a lot of times didn't think too hard about their future in a way where maybe financially they made decisions differently. Or I know when I started my job, I didn't ever contribute to a 401k. I contributed once and I said, oh, no, I'm not going to need that,
Because you just didn't think you'd be around long enough.
No. The amount of times I've heard you might have this amount left, I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I can go get a nice steak. Who cares? I'm not retiring. Not that's like a terrible thought, but you kind of, with CF, you kind of adapt an attitude where you own it. You have maybe a bit of a morbid sense of humor in certain ways, but I can't imagine now if I had access to a drug like this when I was 18 or 19, that would be existential crisis that would create of how do I approach life and its future possibilities now when you didn't really give it a second thought.
Do you feel that way more so, though, because you are on the CF modulator?
Yeah, I have certain goals that I had started a venture, I would say a business that I had really big goals with, and I was making good progress. And I got so sick so fast that it did seem so out of the realm of possibility. And I don't want to say I gave up on it. I kept getting so sick so fast that I didn't have the time that I thought was necessary to pursue it. And now with this modulator, now that I have greater control over my health and I'm back in a spot where I don't feel like, death is right around the corner and I feel like I still got a good amount of time left, I started working towards those professional goals again, and it's giving me a new zest for life, like a new fire.
And we'll be right back. Thanks for supporting our podcast by subscribing to them and for your financial donation to the foundation. A caregiver with a newly diagnosed child listened to our Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast and said it helped her process the disease in a healthy and realistic way. Subscribe and you'll be the first to hear them. Go to the BonnellFoundation.org if you're able to help others in the CF community by donating.
It's so nice to have that fire back. And there's got to be people with CF out there that are, I hope, going through the same, I want to say, renaissance mentally, where there's new hope and new possibilities for their future because they never really gave themselves. I think people we're scared to pursue meaningful relationships sometimes, or maybe we're scared to go after a certain degree we want, or certain career paths don't seem feasible, or we are now able to contribute to a society that is geared towards people that will be here a while. People with CF, we don't really fit in. It's not like you get okay, you think you'll be here for 35 years? Well, this is what you're going to want to do. 80 years, you're going to want to do this. Now we can kind of participate in just like anyone else with these new modulators. And I think that's a wonderful, beautiful thing that the CF community hasn't really had much discussion about. Sometimes I see there's these charities out there, such as the Bonnell Foundation, that they give scholarships. And when I was younger, I kind of was salty about it because I was like, well, yeah, you can get a scholarship if you're healthy enough to see it through. And now it makes sense. Now it's okay, these people that got scholarships back then, now they have these modulators that all worked out. This is great. It's a great, great thing. I wasn't sure how that made sense, but you forget about how great science can be. And when you listen to it and follow it and adhere to what you adhere, you can really do incredible things. But you have to put your mind to it, and you have to be willing to try these new drugs and participate in life. But when you're younger with CF, you don't have that.
Just hearing you talk, you've taken us along your mental journey of the roller coaster, of the ups and downs of this disease, when you think everything's lost and you might not make it to a certain age. And now you're more hopeful. And I have to say, we have to talk a little bit about what you do, because it is so joyful for me to go to the Apple Store. I always ask for you. Hopefully you're working if you're not there, but you're very open with your cystic fibrosis. All the employees know. I'm not giving out information that,
Right.
I'm looking for Steve. Sometimes we'll be talking about my foundation and someone will say, again, if you're not there, they'll say, oh, do you know Steven? He works here. He has CF. And you've just raised so much awareness just in the workplace. I think it's a beautiful thing. So tell us about how work is with cystic fibrosis and, putting it out there to everyone. And then you can talk about your giant helmet or your business that you have also in addition to your work at Apple.
So I've been at Apple 7 years, and 2 months after I started, I got hospitalized. And I was like, oh no, I'm trying to do this new job, and I'm having to miss work right away. I was very lucky to have a job that has benefits and policies and leadership in place that understands that not everyone is healthy. And whenever I have to get admitted, my job is protected, which is a fantastic feeling. It allows me to, because all my other jobs I had before that, it was such a big stressor of like, oh man, if I get too sick and I have to miss work, are they going to want to keep me? But at Apple, I was allowed to be so open about it. And it's been a wonderful environment for me to unintentionally spread awareness of CF, because I'm able to just be myself there. And, if I'm in the back room having a coughing fit, or if I'm taking my enzymes before a meal, or if I'm gone for a few weeks and I come back and people ask questions, it allows me to spread awareness in a way that's not forced. That I'm a real person living this very real life in front of, they have almost 200 employees there, and it's a great opportunity for people to learn what CF is up close. Some of them will visit me in the hospital, or they saw, almost the entire time I was there, I used to have a pick line. I would spend my lunch hour and I would just do an IV in the back room on my lunch. I didn't care. Mm-hmm. And it was great to be able to spread awareness in such a fun, cheerful way. And it allowed them to see like, hey, this is what he has to go through every day. And he still comes in and does a good job with a smile on his face. And I think cystic fibrosis, is well known enough for people have heard the name, but they don't really know what it is or what people go through. And now they've been there for 7 years, and there's been a lot of members of like leadership and the team there that have seen my journey of like going from like an FEV1 of 60%. They've seen this decline up close and personal. And it's wonderful in a weird way to be a part of a team that has been on that journey with me. And for them to know and see the changes that I've had to go through physically, but they've seen that I don't quit. And now they know that anyone else that they meet with CF, they have an up-close understanding in a small way of what we go through. And I think that if they ever go to a different job, or if they meet someone who knows something with CF, that they're going to be able to relate and connect with them better because they've met someone who's able to be so unapologetically open about it. And it's a wonderful thing. When it comes to my business, I started something at the end of 2015, a business called Giant Helmet. I originally worked with a cousin of mine in Canada. He had a company called Voodoo Air, and he's an airbrush artist, and he paints goalie masks for hockey. And he ended up creating a giant version of these goalie masks, and I fell in love with them. And I helped sell them, and I wanted to do more with them. So I started Giant Helmet here in the United States in Michigan. And I basically took over that part of the business where we do giant helmets. And my goal was to always approach it differently and offer programs to bring these helmets to life outside of selling them. I didn't like selling them because I didn't like sponsorship. And sponsorship on these helmets, I think, defeated the purpose of airbrushing them because they're pieces of art. And I didn't want them to be obstructed with sponsorship. So I started Giant Helmet to come up with new ways to creatively fund these. And I was able to fund myself. I funded a helmet for the Detroit Red Wings and the Detroit Lions and the Detroit Tigers. We've gotten them to the Boston Bruins and Notre Dame football.
How big are they?
They're 8.5 feet tall and they're 4 feet wide.
Wow.
And they're to scale of actual helmets. So they're blown up to scale. They're made out of fiberglass. They're painted by hand. They're just a wonderful thing to see in person. And what I love about them is that once they're there, they just put smiles on people's faces. And when you go to a Tigers game and you see the Giant Helmet is out, you see the kids and the fans just running up, take a picture with it. Like, it kind of warms your heart that this thing that you're made once It's just made once, and it instantly becomes a timeless piece of art that people can appreciate forever.
Is it something that the teams always have out for people to see, or they're bringing it out at certain times? Is that what you're saying?
So the Tigers and the Lions always have theirs out. The Red Wings, they're a little finicky sometimes. They have them out for like fan fests and stuff like that. But I think they have so much going on at Little Caesars Arena that I think there's a lot of, okay, take the helmet in, okay, take the helmet out. Because they might have a concert or something where they just doesn't match what they're doing. Where the Lions and the Tigers, it's almost pretty much exclusively baseball and football going on at those arenas. But it's a fun thing to be a part of. And I just love once you make it, it's there forever. And it kind of becomes just a staple of it's a fashion statement for arenas. It's one way I like to put it. I had to stop for a while because I got so sick, and pursuing a goal like that and with the programs I had set up for high schools and stuff, the amount of time it was going to take wasn't going to work when you needed to maintain a job where you needed health care. When you work and you need your health care and then you get hospitalized, and you got to get back to work, it's hard to, the time wasn't there and the money was no longer there to pursue it. And then you get so sick that you could barely work your own regular job that the dream kind of got lost, but it never went away. So I would say that there are things coming within this month, finally, that I've worked all year for that I can't wait to announce.
Oh, you can't announce it here on the podcast?
I could maybe turn my camera a bit and give a sneak peek on something that's coming out. Is that fair?
Yes.
So you'll see on the wall.
Oh, nice.
So I'll say part of the art. We're going to have people be part of the art very soon.
So you're expanding.
Yes. We recently signed I signed a new marketing contract 2 weeks ago. And I would say I put the finishing touches on certain programs, any high school, any college, any pro team. It'll give them the opportunity to fund a helmet through their students anywhere. And there are certain plans in place that these programs are going to support certain CF-related foundations in the state of Michigan.
Wow. So you're being vague on purpose right now as you are getting through this process, but we will definitely update everyone as well.
Yes, I think you will be updated personally very soon.
Oh, it's so exciting, and you're so talented. And as we wrap this up, I mean, your future definitely looks bright. What do you want to say about where you're going now? And we're so excited for the big announcement, by the way.
I would say where I'm going now is where I wish I had went a long time ago. I'm going where my heart takes me. I have this opportunity, thanks to this modulator that I got access to. I have opportunity to pursue my goals again. And my hope is to bring inspiration to really anyone that thinks they're in a situation where they can't do something that you absolutely can, but you got to put your mind to it. Never, ever let your mind work against you. I'm here still because my mind has been strong. In a year from now, I hope I'm still kicking here. And I hope that the story of Giant Helmet will have grown by then. And I hope that I'm still in a point where I maybe don't have new lungs yet. I hope I'm just sitting on the beach somewhere. My favorite place is Clearwater Beach. And I hope that whatever I do lets me spend more time on that beach. I think that would be a wonderful thing.
And what a beautiful way to end this podcast. Steven Strickland, thanks for telling us your story, and your future does look bright. It looks wonderful. We're so happy for you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to have me, and I look forward to speaking soon.
The original music in this podcast is performed by Kevin Allen.
It's not complicated.
Who happens to have cystic fibrosis.
We all got our worries and fears. I know it's got you frustrated, but loving you is so alright.
This has been the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. For more information and to learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, check them out online at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's BONNELL Foundation.org. This podcast was sponsored by Vertex Pharmaceutical, the science of possibility, and produced by Jag and Detroit Podcasts,